Tale of Mind and Matter with Tom Jean Webb.
Yeah.
Opening tonight at 7 p.m. I just figured out like 2 seconds ago that Tom was the very first solo exhibition that I ever had in the space 5 years ago in 5 days from now. So like really, really close to an actual anniversary, which is amazing.
Yeah, and totally accidental.
Yeah, didn't think about that. But it's fitting.
Yeah.
And we'll do a 10-year anniversary show too.
Good. Put it in the diary now.
Yeah. Well, thanks all for coming. Thanks everybody for watching. We're going to be talking about the show, and I wanted to start by asking about the title.
So the title is an extension of the museum show I had earlier this year, which is called A True Fairy Tale. And so I knew that I wanted the show to be a continuation of that with the seesaw and a couple of these larger pieces. But also it was an extension of my thesis that I wrote as part of my master's, which was called My Pantomime, a Wild Life, which stood for What I Love Doing Life, which was a play on Tupac's tattoo, which was Thug Life, but it was called The Hate You Give is what Thug stood for. Yeah. So, yeah, it was my play on that, basically. And so the tale of mind and matter was me thinking about how one expresses themselves through the form of the medium and the use of said medium. But how do you add personality to paint, basically?
A tale of mind and matter.
Yes,
matter
exactly.
Being the paint.
That relationship between production and object.
Nice.
And what is it to choose the material and use the material, and what happens in that process?
Well, a throwback to our talk at AMSET is, what do you think of the materials that you use while painting? Do you remember this question?
No.
Like your process and the materials that you use, using glitter, using putty, using acrylic and oil stick. What draws you to all those different mediums?
I thought there was going to be a punchline to that. You look like you were like...
No, there was at the top.
Oh, there was?
There was, yeah. Reed remembers it.
What was it? Well, I mean, ultimately, a lot of those materials are based in they're materials that I would have used as a child.
Right.
But being used with my adult mind, and making that connection between the two, and also being interested in this idea of low art and high art, or low material, high material. And so, you know, when you use a material that's considered somewhat childish or low, it really accentuates what you're saying once you change the contextualization of that material. You really are able to turn it into something else and give it another meaning, and you force the viewer to re-establish a new relationship with that material.
Nice.
And so that's why I like using those materials, because you are able to add your own personality onto them.
As the artist and the viewer.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I know that we wanted to cover like how you not only play with materials and reappropriate materials, but also the symbols that you're using in the work.
Yeah, I mean, I like, you know, I'm really interested in the viewer's relationship with the work. You know, it's a very intimate relationship. It's a one-on-one, and you're looking at this work. And when someone is looking at a work, they are fed by so much information, whether somebody is, you know, academically kind of well versed in art and art history or not. You know, visual language is such a huge part of our everyday life. And actually, I had this crit on the masters, and someone said, "Oh, well, you can say that because you studied art." And I was like, I sort of fundamentally disagree with that, in the fact that a visual language is such a foundational part of our everyday life, that we understand almost unconsciously the way that imagery should work. You know, colors have a certain feeling, or shapes have a certain kind of emotion. And I really, really enjoy making a viewer establish their own relationship with symbols, and kind of questioning it or subverting it a little bit, being more playful with it. I'm understanding the ground in which these symbols have historically, but I'm trying to change them and kind of lighten them sometimes. So fire would essentially be religiously maybe associated with the devil or death, harm, fear. But and whilst I embrace the idea that it might represent something dark, if I think about fire, it's so important. If you think about it practically, how important it was for the human race to create fire, but also fire is also a rebirthing tool as well. When there's forest fires, although obviously I'm not saying they're good, they do bring out new life. They tried to preserve the redwood to such an extent that it was harming them. They needed fire in order to spread and regrow. So fire, in a way, is a very positive thing as well.
Yeah.
In the same way that water is a strong symbol of life, or tears. Tears, you can cry with happiness and joy, but you can drown in water. And so there's this, very sort of, there's literal meanings of symbols, but I'm hopefully challenging people to create new ideas or their own relationship with the symbols.
Yeah, and so much of this exhibition is about manifestation, joy, playfulness, and just piggybacking off of the tears. There's a painting at the back of the room, right in the middle of that selection of 5, where the tears are really feeding the flower.
Yeah.
And then the flower is thinking of the cloud to create the tears. So
exactly.
It is this cycle that you're playing with.
Yeah, because it's forcing you to think about, to interpret that teardrop and realizing that actually it's nourishing for that flower.
Right.
And, a lot of the work is about embracing, it's about positive manifestations, but it's also not trying to exclude darkness. It's embracing it as part of the relationship.
Yeah.
Living with it, understanding it and using it. And that flower may be very unhappy and sad, but it's grieving and it needs it. And through embracing it, it will move forward. Or the thoughts are positive and he's feeding on the positive thoughts and it's helping it to grow. And, embracing all those emotions, basically.
Yeah. And I know that so much of this exhibition is about joy and playfulness and manifestation and how you use your studio.
Yes.
In general.
Yeah, it was, so part of that is really interesting because obviously moving back to the UK, it was less about, I'd experienced this story here and this experience here. And I took that with me, and then I found myself in a studio space again, in this kind of bubble. And what I realized is I wanted to turn the studio into a room in which reality is less important. And a space in which I held the creativity. Because the original work was about this journey to come out to America.
When you first moved here.
When I first moved here, and that was the work, manifesting that. And I created that through my work, and that was a really interesting relationship that I had with the work, that my work had created a reality for myself.
Yeah.
And then I was here, and so then I embraced that, and I was thinking about what is it to be grounded and static and observational of what is around me. And then I went back with all of that and went back to the studio. And what I'd realized in that journey is this place, this thing outside of myself had such a strong impact on what I was doing. And I was like, what is it? If anywhere you go, you take yourself with you, what is it if I held the creativity and not the outside? And so when I went into the studio, I was like, okay, I'm going to shut the door and turn it into this little bubble of escapism. And in that process, would I find something more inherently me? And that was the challenge, and that's what I wanted to question.
Yeah, do you think that shift started here?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it's really, my last studio had no windows. And I think for a lot of artists, that's a problem. And I really, really loved it because I got to shut the door and just create my own little theatre, basically. I got to world build when I was in there. And someone said, oh, you're painting your windows. And that was really, was that you maybe?
That wasn't
No,
me.
it
I
wasn't
can't take
yours.
credit.
And that was really, really important when someone said that to me. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
from this building, I can paint a window and look at whatever I want that's on the outside of this room.
Yeah.
And I became really interested in the idea as a studio being timeless, spaceless. You know, there's no geography. When I walk into that room, I can be any character that I want to be.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's been your friend for 5 years and shown your work for 5 years, you know, I also see how you were looking outward. You were sort of projecting yourself onto a Texas or southwestern landscape in your earlier paintings when we first started to work together. The painting sort of started to look down at your own feet.
Yeah.
And then sort of maybe at an inner relationship between you and the world. And now we're starting to see some like of the world around you being personified.
Yeah.
Through, you know, eyes on in the landscape, and you know the relationship between the flowers and hands. And can you talk a little bit about personifying different natural elements?
There's a couple of different things. So basically, when I was doing a crit, someone was showing their work, and it was a painting of a mountain, and they said, "Oh, I just wanted to capture the mountain." And I thought that was really interesting because I was like, one, the language is interesting. I want to capture the mountain. And I thought that's such a weird way of wanting to sort of own this thing, this part of nature. And also I realized it was impossible. What I realized that happens when you paint the mountain is you're not painting the mountain, you're painting yourself. You're painting your interpretation, you're feeling your relationship with your mountain. Everything you're doing is done through your own eyes, your own mind, and your own hand. So, and then I was researching Mama Anderson, and she talked about every painting being a self-portrait. And so what I realized is whatever one does, it's an attempt at understanding the human condition. And my language, in order to access that, is nature.
Yeah.
Because what I realized I wanted to do, you know, I would ask myself this question: if nature is pure, then what am I? And by doing so, I'm trying to find that answer out a little bit. I'm using it as my language in trying to sort of understand the self a little bit more.
Yeah, you talk about the sort of like wild and domicile.
Yes.
Together.
Yeah.
And the relationship between the two.
Yeah, exactly. The idea, like, what is one's natural self? What is one's nurtured self? How does that manifest itself as a creative act? For me, that's my output. That's the way I try to understand that question. You know, and I think that's always been underlying for me because I've always been interested in who the artist I was as a kid and the journey that this kid was on that I would bring with me. And understanding this idea of pure creative act. I guess oneself ultimately. There's always a search for, and art's so interesting because it's seen as a pure act of self-expression, and I'm really interested in questioning that and like what are the things in that potentially are fallible, and instead of being cynical about that, which is I definitely don't want to do, is embracing and enjoying that and using that as part of the question process. You know, someone like Mike Kelly, who's like super interested in the fallibility of memory, and you know, the somewhat misguided ideas of true expression, maybe. I found he had a big show at Tate Modern last year, which I totally fell in love with, and I really, really liked this idea of questioning those things and turning them into a creative act as well at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just thinking about the process as being like an act of self-exploration, and that's always a moving target. And you're among the most prolific painters that I know. You're never precious about the work, like the specific painting. We talked about like chasing a masterpiece. That's not something that you're ever interested in.
No.
And I think that it leads to so many great paintings. And I wanted to sort of end on this note of like what's on the back of your canvas.
Oh, yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, so that started. I don't really know how that started.
I remember when you began it.
Yeah.
So maybe I could.
Yeah, maybe you know.
I think that you wanted to like put a little secret back there, and also like it's also a way to authenticate,
Yes, that's.
but then lead into the next piece.
Yes, so that's it. It started off as this idea of authentication. One of the things I really like, I realize I like doing is a little bit of game playing. Like I like embracing the little bit of naughtiness as well, and like I like the idea of this secret that lies behind the canvas. Remember, I did the piece with the mirror, and the mirror is holding a card on the mirror, and it was a tarot card, and no one would ever know what that tarot card is, and it's really annoying because it's stuck on the mirror, and you're looking at yourself trying to like find it, and
you can see like the front edges, kind of.
But you'd never. And I like, you know, looking at the seesaw. It's very playful and fun, and
right.
And I like that, and always being interested in performance of viewing. And there's something really nice about letting people know there's another artwork on the back.
Yeah.
And so, but then what it always is I paint the work and I title the work, and then the back is a reinterpretation of that
title.
Nice. And it's always done as quickly and as instinctively as possible. And what that has done, and what's really, really nice about that is the work then feeds the work. It becomes this self-feeding system.
Yeah.
And then I document that, and then that then leads on to more drawings. And so, yeah, it's a bit like that painting in the middle where the flower is thinking about the clouds and the clouds is crying, and then then it's feeding off. It's like this. The work feeding itself, and it's really, really interesting as the artist to have that relationship, which is on one level incredibly close, and also on another level you're just sort of like giving it enough food to keep going. You know?
They're fantastic drawings in their own right too.
I really, really love them. Fun. Yeah.
And we completely skipped over the seesaw, and I want to touch on this.
Yes.
Why is there a seesaw in this space?
So this was a huge part of. I was researching about some of the stuff that I was interested in, and so basically when I started my master's I was really interested in the frame as an object, and then you know, could I play with the idea, so obviously a painting is about implied space, but maybe the frame could start playing with the real space in which it exists.
You're putting like ladders on the work and building off of the frame.
Exactly. And then I was thinking about how the gallery is a frame, the year that you show it is a frame, the country in which you show it is a frame, you know, the political environment in which you show it is a frame. And so the context in which it's shown becomes a frame in itself. And so like mixing that with like thinking about the performance of viewing. And then I started researching the history of carnivals and the way that carnival worked, and that this was very sort of theatrical act, and people were making costumes and doing performances, and that there was, you know, historically most of the performances would have a location, and the location was normally in Europe was the center of a town, and so I had the museum show. And I was thinking, and then the other big thing about Carnival was about leveling out class systems. So everyone, it was like a grounding, it was like a plateauing of everything. It was like a very early sort of punk movement, basically. And so I was thinking about the museum show and thinking about what an elevated space that is, and maybe intimidating on some level, maybe, you know, maybe somewhat stuffy. I don't, you know, certainly. That's the stereotypical idea of it. And so what I wanted to do was put something in the middle of the show, like the middle of a town, which would invite the audience to come in, to forget the outside world, to embrace something new, and an act, to engaging that act, and that then would in turn affect the relationship between the paintings.
Yeah.
So the idea being, you come in, you use the seesaw, you become more playful, you become more vulnerable. You know, safe play is a really important thing that I was researching as well. and how play can shed down fear and some of those sort of more negative attributes that we develop in our everyday lives. And so, yeah, it's this way of sort of breaking down the hierarchy of a museum, people embracing their more inner childish side, maybe, sillier side, but using that sillier side to then be able to do something serious with it, which is to go and engage with the rest of the show. And then, what was really interesting about the work, pardon me, which is kind of unexpected and I didn't think about it, was when you look at the painting, and I talked about it earlier, it's such a one-on-one experience. It's silent and it's between you and the painting, and that looking and that moving through the implied space of a painting. Whereas the seesaw forced you to find another human being, look at them, and have this dual experience, and I really enjoyed all the sort of symbolism that came by that. This idea of balancing, working together, finding some sort of harmony, looking at another human being, having a relationship with that person, and that also felt quite apt for a lot of this year, given certain tribalistic qualities that are promoted within a political climate or a social climate. So what was the question again? The seesaw, yeah. So that was a really successful piece, and then I ended up making a rocking horse for my degree show. So the idea was that was again going back to the solo activity. So you would sit on the rocking horse, and the painting was it was quite a surreal landscape. And the idea is that you would slowly start to, like, the physical movement became quite a meditative act.
In front of a painting.
In front of a painting, yeah. So that you were trying to ride off into the sunset.
Yeah, basically. I love that. Breaking the barriers.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I do want to open it up for questions, too. Does anybody have any?
Yeah, I had a question about you. I had a question about you. You used the metaphor of, like, fire and water.
Yeah.
And, like, before you said that, I was looking at red as tears, the longer I look at them, they started to look like flame, too. And I was wondering if, like in that art piece, too, it's like there's almost an alternating pattern of, like, a tear and then a flame and then a tear. So is that intentional?
Yeah. No, well, both. No, totally. And I, the water forms can be spit, blood, tears, sweat. The idea is that they're fluid and they're elemental, basically, and that a lot of this, the work is a very conscious idea. Tangible, practical, performative idea about learning to understand that I have dark. I'm a dark person, but I want we did kickboxing together, you know that, and but I want light and I want joy as well in my life, and this is an act, and understanding that it's not about shutting one off. Like, one's really important. Your fire is really important. Harnessed in the right way, it can be good. So I'm finding positive ground for it and using it for the light as well at the same time.
And you do have a lot of clever ways of hiding sort of subliminal messages in your work too.
Yeah.
Like to take this piece for example, the flower in the center acting almost as like a nose, and then the leaves acting as almost a smile.
Yeah.
Questions, I'll take another second. But you kind of already touched on this with the sort of complication you said, but there's definitely, or I think there are these sort of subtle faces. That one was obvious, right? And yes, flower nose. So is that as simple as the idea of self-portrait in a way, or is there a reason certain ones have these faces, or is there more significance?
Well, the paintings are, there's that idea that paintings are self-portraits, but your relationship with nature is a self-portrait as well. The way that you relate to your outside world is a reflection on the way that you are. So if you are destructive to the outside world, you're destructive to yourself. And so that's really important to me, is understanding that as a concept. I think that in terms of, like, they are not about people in particular. There's no particular person. And so when there's a face in there, what I want you to do is be that face, ultimately, is to be that person.
Kind of a reminder.
Yeah,
Check in.
yeah. I'm asking it to be a bit of a mirror at the same time, definitely.
And is that developing during kind of the concept stage, or like this is going to be one that has those there early on, or do you kind of does it just happen naturally while you're painting?
I mean, the thing is, because the paintings used to have figures in them, and I got to the point where I realized is that the viewer is the figure. So I didn't need the figure, because otherwise you're watching the figure do the activity, and I want you to do the activity. So you are the figure now. And the fact that they are painted from a human perspective, like all art is they are inherently figurative on some level. They're on some level portrait. And sometimes I like to, when you read or view a painting, I like to create little games. And so sometimes it's more obvious and sometimes it's less so obvious. But when it's in a series, they start to communicate to you as well as a collective. And so you start to read things differently. And so that then goes back to the performance of viewing and how you stage something. And so certain things become more evident when grouped together. In terms of individually, I don't think I think when I'm doing a painting, I do a lot of sketching and drawing and things will build up in that process. And then sometimes I'll make a series of works and I'll realize that as a collective they're missing something in it. And I have my symbols, that I start to add in. It all depends on how complete they do or do not feel, I like, as much as I sketch out things, I definitely want there to be a window in which I don't know, because that goes back to testing your nature or nurture. That's a test. And there's the idea that there's this window in which you don't know is a really important part. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's the unknown, and that's the bit that one doesn't always know about themselves. And that's where, because when you say I'm not that precious about paintings, it's because it's not that I don't love the paintings, it's the fact that I love what I don't know about the paintings. And so when it's to ask me questions, and so once I've found the next question for the next painting, that's the bit that drives me forward again at that point.
Well, I love that part of it. And the other question, I thought that your sort of bubble studio is such an interesting idea. You're kind of erasing the outside world, and so I'm really curious if you have any dedicated recurring practice of sort of filling up your tank of sensory experience and references outside of that. Because obviously, if you're in this bubble without that, it'd be hard to make stuff. So when you create this really blank space, I'm curious if that's just living your life, or if you have a sort of dedicated practice. For instance, I know Jeweler who goes on a trip every year to a different part of the world.
Interesting, yeah.
Charge your creative.
Well, experiences are information, aren't they, to interpret? Ultimately what you're doing is you're interpreting life as a paint. As an artist, that's what you do. There was an artist who was taught. There's this place called Null Island, and it exists off of the northwest of Africa, and it's basically a buoy that just floats in the sea. And what it does is it interprets all the information from all the satellites and sends it all out to the rest of the world on our phones. And when she was talking about this, I was like, oh, an artist is Null. And it's not a real place, it's just a buoy, it's on maps, it just exists as a fake place, but this fake place interprets information and affects our everyday life. And I was like, oh, artists is like Null Island. We're just absorbing all this information and reinterpreting it and putting it out as a thing in order to communicate to the viewer, to the audience. How structured I am about... I do a lot of hiking. I live in quite a green part of London, which really, really helps. And also, ultimately, when I talk about the studio being this kind of geographically sort of non-entity, sort of its bubble, that was the challenge, to see if basically I'm the studio, ultimately. So wherever I go, I take myself with me, and also I am simultaneously the studio. And the studio and the artist.
It sounds like being outside, though,
Yeah.
is an important part of kind of
Totally.
the picture of your practice.
Totally. And what I will do, and obviously every time you move to the studio, it's quite a challenge. You're just sitting in a white space. It's somewhat intimidating. But I certainly have structures that I've built up from a kid, and that is to start drawing. Always start drawing. And you've been to the last studios around here. So then they'll build a mind map wall. And that's when I start building essentially what is some sort of Bible towards what the next work's going to be.
That's kind of your interpretation of the world that you've already seen, kind of first take on your drawing.
Yeah.
Things, and then you get to kind of pull from that.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Nice. And yeah, a lot of reading as well. That's the new part of the process. A lot of writing, a lot of building up the world from the ground up, basically. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, because that was also, I really love the idea of the bubble. And then the processing information through it. Then I'm going to ask a similar question, but then just to add on to it, do you have how's your practice nowadays? Have you walk into the studio,
Right.
You just start sketching right away, or do you have your time to sit down and kind of let your mind go, do you get confused by different things, you get lost in different things, or you sit down, are you regimented into like draw every day?
I'm very regimented about the hours. Totally, yeah. I'm very, there was another artist that was talking about creativity is a manifestation of work. Like, it's the product of work. And I'm very much into that. Like, creativity for me is not just like a piece of magic. It is acquired by lots and lots and lots of work, and really engaging and having an incredible, like, a very dedicated relationship to what you want to make, and the practice of making art. And so, yeah, I do a lot of hours, and I'm quite strict, and I'm very strict about it. But I know where the ground is, and I know how to build it. And I believe in order to be a successful artist, you have to build a really healthy relationship with the process. And if you can do that, then the final product takes care of itself. It just makes it, right, almost by accident. In terms of like the day to day, it's that weird relationship between being structured and also allowing for moments of play. You're building your playground, and then you get to go in and just, play with the Lego, basically.
Where your tools are in the
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not as structured as I am about time and dedication and the act of making art. I'm certainly not structured about cleanliness or anything like that. I mean,
Studio's like a bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to have it all there, and I'll sit down on it as a kid and just make it like I've always done at that point.
It is a lot of pouring and picking up new materials.
It's a very physical act.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, and once you get on, it's like a steam train. It's like getting it going. Once it's going, you're just trying to keep up with it. Getting it going.
You always do a consistent 8-hour day.
Yeah.
Five days a week, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
A lot of work. Any other questions?
You brought this from the UK, or do you have a
This was commissioned for the museum show. So this was built out in Beaumont in Texas. Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't bring that with me.
I know, it's like the same exact one you did there.
This is the one.
This
was only in Beaumont.
Only in Beaumont. It's only been made over here, yeah. I made a rocking horse in the UK. Yeah. So, yeah. This is, this was really important because I wanted it to work the idea is it wasn't going to be fixed because I wanted it to be like a sculpture that can be moved around, and I needed it to exist like form-wise with a lot of the values of sculpture that I like. And the first and foremost, it had to exist as a sculpture, and part of that was that it should be able to be moved. And But then, of course, and simultaneously was the function, the kinetic, performative idea of it. And so even some of the shapes, this central system is trying to mirror some of these more liquid shapes. So hopefully the visual language, shape-wise, is mirroring it as well. And, and the material, obviously. I mean, originally I wanted people to be able to carve into it and mark their names and stuff, But obviously we couldn't have chisels and in a museum and all that kind of stuff.
We could have them here. But don't mess this up.
You can just carve the walls and stuff.
Yeah, you can walls. I would rather. I can repair the walls.
Oh, this painting over here is quite different from everything else here.
Yeah.
The paint product is thicker than anything you're using. The forms are consistent.
Yes.
And the landscapes are consistent, but you added another dimension.
Well, and so that's the talking of that mind and matter, the material, and to go back to this idea of low art material and elevating it, because this is essentially kids' Play-Doh. That's what it is. It's an air dry clay version of it, and it's the sort of the fullest extent of those ideas in terms of that material. Like, I always think about paintings as you have this triangle of performance, material, and image, and where your painting sits in the middle of that in terms of the proportions in which make up that painting changes how the work is seen or related to. And so this one is definitely like slightly more down towards the material in the process. But this material started off being on rocks from that first show, and then it started making the frames. That was the interest in thinking about the frames of a painting, and then it just felt natural for it to start like a virus, start spreading onto the canvas itself. And it's certainly a lot more of this to come. It's something that I'm very, very excited about.
Is this the newest piece?
No, not the newest piece. No, that was in the museum. Yeah.
It's worth noting, I mean, you've always got a few sort of bodies of work going at every one time, and they weave into each other a lot.
Yeah. I realised that, and this is to do with a lot of this painting. There's this crossover. Like the painting over there has got the two flowers, speech bubbles are crossing over. The work is about understanding contradictions in self and many different variations of self. And so I realized that, like, in my work, I have lots of different types of output because I have lots of different types of self. I'm a walking bag of contradictions, basically, and I embrace that. and I understand that I'm different senses of self, and that will keep on changing as I get older all the time. I never want to stay rooted to one sense of idea of self. Sometimes I purposely play different characters. I wrote my thesis was about telling lies in my fiction. I really enjoy that. And so, but what happens is that obviously they all start to bleed over to each other, and I like that. I mean, the Play-Doh, actually, just remembered that is that how this started is I wanted to start putting chewing gum on the bottom of the frames, like you get in the schools or underneath your chairs, and I realised I wanted it to be more seen than that. Dan Cohen, the artist, uses a lot of chewing gum, which I found out after his bubblegum paintings, but I absolutely adore. I mean, he's one of my favourite artists. So, but yeah, it's my variation of that, basically. Yeah, I'm going to make more.
Great band.
You're asking for my little secrets. Yeah, of course.
Proprietary.
Is that roots happening? Or
Yeah.
Is there, okay. First I was like, is there an anthill here?
You can make it an anthill if you want. That's
Well,
the game.
This has been great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And the exhibition's on view till November 22nd. So
Cool.
thanks.
Thanks.